Hello. So, welcome back. I wanted to put out a series of videos talking about Venerable Matthieu Ricard's book, A Plea for the Animals. This book came out years ago. It's quite a good book, though, that presents a lot of important information about the intersection between Buddhist spirituality, Buddhist philosophy, and adopting a vegan diet or a vegan lifestyle, because a vegan lifestyle, of course, would go beyond just food choices and would impact what a person wears in terms of leather and the general view of choosing not to incorporate animal products into what a person purchases. So I guess a vegan lifestyle is a more accurate way of describing that philosophy. So, as I say, I'll be putting out a series of videos looking at this book, the various points that he makes. The first point that he makes in relation specifically to the Buddhist view and how it relates corresponds to an important point of view in my own life for why I adopted this sort of lifestyle, and why it's something that I would encourage people to consider. And it's a concept that you, in one way, that you find espoused very commonly in this community, which is the idea of connecting one's actions with one's values, and how a person lives from a perspective that is in agreement with what they believe. People believe, most people, most ordinary, people, to be honest, believe in not causing unnecessary harm to living sentient beings. But that viewpoint, extending it into a vegan lifestyle is something that it becomes more difficult, I think, because our culture doesn't really support that extension. The typical Western culture. However, there are these aspects of Buddhist culture, Buddhist philosophy, that do lend themselves to pointing out how we might, or why we might, integrate those views. And so in the book, Matthieu Ricard starts out by addressing this concept of Buddha nature, Tathagata Garbha, or Buddha nature. And Buddha nature can mean somewhat different things in different Buddhist schools. I practice, and Venerable Matthieu Ricard practices in the Tibetan Buddhist perspective. And from that perspective, Buddha nature is the fact that the mind itself, at its most basic, its most essential, is changeable, is malleable. We are not one with the afflicted states of mind. Afflicted can be kind of a charged word from the Western perspective, but the idea that, hatred can arise in our mind, jealousy can arise in our mind, malicious intent can arise in our mind. We would all agree that those states of mind are painful for oneself when they arise, and they often are what underlie actions that cause harm to others. Those kinds of mental states, we might think of them as one with the mind, because even from a young age we experienced varying degrees of those mental states. But from the Buddhist perspective, the mind itself, at its most essential, is not impacted by those afflicted states. They are covering this primordially pure nature of mind. And because the mind is not the same as or one with these afflictions, the mind can be cultivated, the mind can be developed. And all sentient beings, a sentient being in English, the phrase sentient being is a translation from Tibetan of sem chen, or mind possessor. And so we as humans are sentient beings, but also non-human animals are sentient beings, mind possessors. And we and they possess Buddha nature. We and they have minds that appear, on a surface level, to have certain qualities, have certain capacities, certain familiarities, certain natures. But on a deep level, our mind and the mind of a non-human animal are both malleable, both changeable. Now, of course, from the Buddhist perspective, it's true that in order to really take advantage of one's Buddha potential, one's Buddha nature, it becomes necessary to actually study, learn, meditate, to nurture, to fan the spark of one's Buddha nature, one's Buddha potential. And a human is capable of that, and an animal, in that particular lifetime, an animal is not. However, animals still possess that quality as part of their mind, and so they are not fundamentally different from oneself. So Matthieu Ricard says, from the point of view of Buddhism, it is therefore out of the question to use human intelligence for the purpose of exploiting other beings. Our human intelligence should be used to fan the flame of our Buddha potential, and not directing it in the creation of all of these systems of exploitation. He quotes then the Lankavatara Sutra. The Lankavatara Sutra is probably the sutra where the Buddha most directly and most stridently talks about the way in which Buddhist practitioners should abstain from consuming animal products. In that sutra, the Buddha says, "Alas, what sort of virtue do these beings practice? They fill their bellies with the flesh of animals, thus spreading fear among the beasts who live in the air, in the water, and on the earth. Practitioners of the way should abstain from meat, because eating it is a source of terror for beings." Eating it is a source of terror for beings. So here the Buddha is suggesting, encouraging, and so here when it says practitioners of the way, the phrase Buddhism, the word Buddhism, is a very recent kind of European invention of scholars who stumbled upon Buddhist teachings, Western European scholars who labeled it as such. It was called the Way at the time of the Buddha, and Tibetans, refer to themselves not as Buddhists but as inner beings, as those who look inward rather than outward. So what he's saying is, what the Buddha here is saying is that as practitioners of the way, of the Buddha's teachings, we need to be mindful of the fact that we are participating in a system that gives rise to terror for sentient beings. And, we can see that that's clearly true when we look at the documentaries, the slaughterhouse footage that we can find in so many places. We can see the terror that is caused, and not only on that last day, but the pain and the terror that those beings are subject to throughout their lives, being kept in those abhorrent conditions, that characterize their entire lives. So what we should consider then is that these beings, these mind possessors, these semchens, these non-human animals, are like us in the sense that their mind is changeable, and from the Buddhist perspective, at some point they will achieve enlightenment. They will achieve Buddhahood in the future, because mind itself, which is possessed by all sentient beings, is of the same nature. And so the way in which we should relate to them ought to be one of compassion, ought to be one that honors that view that we hold, that sentient beings ought not be subject to unnecessary pain and suffering, and how this really also supports our own spiritual growth and development. This is a practice that we also benefit from, because when we begin to relate to sentient beings in this way, and we begin to align this view that we have with our actual actions by choosing to not participate in that cycle of suffering, that cycle of exploitation, then really we are also the ones who reap that benefit as well. His Holiness the Dalai Lama encourages us. He says if we're going to be selfish, we should be wisely selfish, meaning that we should do the things. If we're going to be interested in what's best for ourselves, then we should really contemplate what is best for ourselves, and not go about that in a mistaken way, to go about that in an intelligent way. And one way of going about that in an intelligent way is to ask ourselves the question, if I wish to progress by deepening my love, my compassion, my generosity, is it true that I have actions that might be holding me back from that? Can I engage in different actions as a training that would help me to make that progress, to accomplish that goal that I've freely chosen more rapidly. So we can see that, to some degree, of course, as the Buddha is saying, these systems act in the world as a source of terror for sentient beings. And if we can reduce that to whatever degree that we can, then we are benefiting other sentient beings. But even more immediately, we are honoring a deep place within ourselves, a place that I think we have to turn off or we have to ignore in order to engage in these actions of eating meat and dairy and purchasing leather and fur and so on, and eggs and all of these different ways in which animals are exploited. And so it's really also oneself who benefits when we make that switch and we align our virtues, our ethics with the actions that we are taking. So I'll be offering thoughts and reflections on different aspects of Matthieu Ricard's A Plea for the Animals, over a number of videos. So these are just some points of reflection, and I hope that people share, their thoughts in contemplating them. So I appreciate your time, and I will see you when I post another video. Thanks so much.